Hi everyone, Mike here. Welcome to another episode of Merch Buzz. Today what we're going to do is talk about job interviews. Basically, with this episode, I want to split it in two sections. The first part will be talking about job interviews in general. This will be a very, what I would consider, quick overview, and a lot of people would kind of consider this content to be common sense. They will say, you know what, I know this kind of stuff. You don't need to go over this, but I want to go over it just in case you're second guessing yourself, and maybe you need a bit of a pep talk before you actually go into that interview. Maybe you need some assurance, and you really want somebody to confirm, what the interview format looks like, what you should wear, and what you should bring to your interview. The other part of this, I want to concentrate on our behavioral-based questions. Now, if you're asking, what are they and why are you talking about these types of questions specifically and not, let's say, situational questions or direct questions? Well, it's because these are becoming extremely trendy and employers love them. Basically, over the last couple of years, especially for, let's say, internship students, co-op students, new grads, and people with some experience, when they get an invite for a job interview, some companies have actually been sending descriptions and explanations of behavioral interviews, behavioral-based questions, and saying, this is the format that we expect you to follow when you're answering these questions. So they're actually saying to you up front, they're saying, we will be asking you some direct questions. We will be asking you questions directly from your resume, but we will go over behavioral questions, and we expect a specific way in which you will be answering on, or in which way we expect you to answer them. So we'll talk about what those ways are, and why employers are concentrating on behavioral based questions. So let's kick it off. Let's talk about interviews in general. The interview format. Let's talk about that. So basically, you know this. You know that your cover letter and your resume get you the interview, but your interview gets you the job. The way I look at it is the interview basically covers two things. First thing is, can you do the job? Do you actually have the technical knowledge, technical understanding, and skills that are required to do the job? And then the second part of that is, can I, for example, as a manager, work with you for 8 hours a day, 5 days a week? Those are basically the only two questions that I'm trying to answer. But again, I would be asking you many questions to get those answers out of you. The standard length of an interview is anywhere from 15 to 45 minutes. A lot of employers will book an hour just to be safe. And in those 15 to 45 minutes, you might get anywhere to from 4 to 9 questions. One of the things, again, and I mentioned at the beginning, this might be common sense to you, is always begin and end an interview with a handshake. It doesn't matter if you walk into the interview room and you see somebody sitting off to the side, or you might think that they're just a note taker. Introduce yourself, greet them politely, and shake their hand. The types of interviews that you might receive are in person, which is probably the most common, phone interview, and right now video, or let's say Skype or Zoom interviews, teamwork, video conferencing interviews are on the rise. If you receive a phone interview, let's say if you are fairly close to that employer, most likely the interview is a screening interview. This is where the employer will book, 15 to 20 minutes and basically ask you the most basic, the most simple questions that relate to that job, just to get a sense if you actually have that, like I said, most basic understanding and knowledge that is required for that job. If you are a little further away from the company, a phone interview might be a full-blown interview, which will take a little longer. The style of the interview could be one-on-one, could be a panel interview, which is, for example, 2+ interviewers, or a group interview where you yourself are not the only candidate. So they might be interviewing multiple people at the same time. What should you wear? Again, this is another common sense thing, or something that could be perceived as common sense, but in a lot of cases, it's not. A full professional dress code is always appropriate and recommended. They say that you cannot overdress for an interview, but you can underdress. And I'm just going to use a kind of a silly example here, but if you say to yourself, you know what, I have this really, really great fluorescent green shirt that I want to wear and I look really good in, my suggestion is don't do it, because if you wear anything that takes away from what you're actually saying, that takes away from your message to the employer, then it's not advisable. A lot of people ask questions about the type of jewelry, any other accessories, for example, that they would consider trendy, and they say, should I wear this to an interview? Judge this for yourself. Again, go based on that question. Is this taking away from what you're actually saying? Because the purpose of you being there is to get that job. Okay, let's move on. What are some things that you should bring with you? A lot of people, especially younger people that are just entering the market, are hesitant to sometimes bring anything in besides a copy of their resume, and they're hesitant to take notes or even have a sip of water during an interview. All of that is completely appropriate. So my suggestion is bring a portfolio with you. Bring a copy of your resume. I would suggest a copy for each interviewer. If you know that you're being interviewed by 2 or 3 people, bring 2 or 3 copies. Bring a copy of the job posting. Print it off. If you need to highlight some things that you believe are key points, do that as well. A list of references, pen and paper, and a bottle of water. Pen and paper is very important. Don't be hesitant to take notes, and especially if you have a question for the panel or the interviewer, write it down and ask them at the end, especially if they've actually said we will give you a chance to ask questions at the end of the interview. Sometimes I found myself in situations if they're asking you, let's say, a 3-part question, if the nerves kick in and you're not as sharp as you are regularly, what you want to do is basically just write down the 3 points of that question so that you can kind of follow along and provide answers for each point, so that way you don't provide an incomplete answer, because it is really, really important to answer the question completely. The topics that the interviewers ask about, usually these are pretty much the same for all types of interviews. The employers care about mostly the same things. However, an interview can be, let's say, heavy on the soft skills, or it could be more technical if you are in a technical field. Let's say if you are in engineering, they will be asking you a lot of technical questions related to the job, but they will never skip over some of the soft skills and other general questions. So I'll just go through some of these just to give you a sense of what a standard interview looks like. some of the general questions, they will be, tell me about yourself. This is a very common kind of opening question. What do you consider to be your greatest weakness? Employers love to ask this question. It not only throws you off a little bit, makes you nervous, but if you don't answer it correctly, it makes you admit certain things. When it comes to work-specific questions, they can ask, can you work well under deadlines or pressure? Please elaborate. They will ask you about your education, especially if you're a new grad, if you're a co-op student, or if you're looking for a junior role. They can say, what courses do you like best and least, and why? Give us some examples of some of the projects or lab work that you've been involved in. When it comes to career goals, they will say, what are your long range and short range career goals? This is very important. Think about what the employer wants to hear. If you're a recent grad, for example, and you're not sure if you're going to be going back to school, let's say to do your master's or to do your PhD or whatever the case is, maybe a certificate on top of your degree, let the employer know that you plan on continuing to work, especially for them if you are successful. There isn't a single employer that wants to hear that you plan to leave their company in a year or two because your long-term goals are to go back to school. When it comes to the knowledge of the job, they might say something like, in your opinion, what skills and qualifications are essential to be successful in this position? What they want to get out of that question or answer is they want to see that you've actually done your research, that you understand the job, that you understand what skills are required to be successful in that role. And then the last thing that I'll mention is they might ask you about the company. So they might say, why do you want to work for us? Or why did you apply to this company specifically? Be prepared for those. Now, I mentioned behavioral-based questions. First thing that I want to say is behavioral questions are very easy to identify. They usually start with, tell me about a time when, give me an example when, or describe a situation when. Now, the reason behind this is that the employer believes that your past experience is an indicator of your future abilities. And again, this is the most common style of interview for students, for new grads, and junior positions. Now, to answer these questions, what you want to do is you want to think of relevant examples from your past. These could be your studies, work experience, community work, or personal experience. Now, I'm going to go through a certain method, a model that is recommended to use when it comes to behavioral questions. And you might say, you know what are you doing? You're giving me a method here. You're using a certain technique to answer this question. That's not how I function. But once I get through this, I believe that you will actually say, you know what? The flow of information that you're providing to employers makes sense if you use this method. This method is called the STAR method. Situation, task, action, result. Now, when it comes to the situation, what you want to do is you want to describe the context for the activity that you're describing. You don't want there to be any mystery about what situation you were in. And keep in mind that this is about you. Even if you're talking about group work or a project that you worked on with others, the employer still wants to hear what you had to do. Then move on to the task. And just like I explained it, talk about exactly what you specifically were required to do. Then we get to action. So STAR, situation, task, action, result. action is what you actually did to complete the task. So this would be your approach, process used, and how you managed yourself and the task. So go into very specific details. Talk about timelines, talk about methods that you used. And then, in my opinion, the last thing, which is also the most important thing, is the result. Talk about the outcome of your actions, the contribution you made in response to that situation, and then quantify if possible. If you don't have a positive result, I would suggest that you don't talk about that situation. And then when I say quantify if possible, the results would basically sound something like, and as a result, I increased productivity by 25%. Or, as a result, I saved this amount of money. It would depend on the position that you're applying for. I want to talk about, before I get into some examples, and I'll provide a number of examples, but I'll go over one specific answer. But before I do that, I want to talk about some skills that are actually preferred by employers. And I want you to keep this in mind as you're thinking about different situations that you can talk about if you're asked a behavioral question. And again, this is a list of 20 skills, and I'm going to take some time and actually go through them slowly, but I want you to pay attention to all of these because the studies have been done, and again, these are the top 20 skills that are preferred by employers. Number 1, communication skills. And then more specifically, it would be verbal communication skills. Number 2, teamwork skills. 3, analytical skills. 4, strong work ethic. Again, as I'm going through these, please think of different situations that you can mention for each one of these skills. Number 5, problem-solving skills. 6, initiative. 7, interpersonal skills. This relates well to others. Number 8, we're back to communication skills. In this case, it's written communication skills. Number 9, flexibility, adaptability. Number 10, organizational skills. Number 11, computer skills, IT skills, information technology. Number 12, detail-oriented. Again, for this one I would say, come up with an example that you can talk about. Number 13, leadership skills. Number 14, self-confidence. 15, friendly, outgoing personality. Now, in this case, friendly and outgoing personality might be way more important if you're talking about specific jobs like sales, for example, or if you are in marketing and part of your job will be to interact with, let's say, external customers and possibly internal customers. You might be dealing with different departments. Number 16, are you creative? 17, tactfulness. 18, are you a risk taker? Number 19, strategic planning skills. And number 20, this might be a surprise to you, but it's sense of humor. Employers love to see that you have a sense of humor. Quick overview, not an overview, but just basically I just want to mention one more time the START method. The concept behind this type of question, behavioral question, is that the best indicator of future behavior is past behavior. So I'm going to repeat this a couple of times because I really want this to stick with you. The employer doesn't want to know what you would do in this situation. They want to know what you have done. So they believe that they can predict the future or predict your future behavior based on your past behavior. That is the whole theory behind these questions, because the employers believe that it's easy to talk about what you would do, but they know that people behave different when it actually comes time to do whatever they are asking you to do. So again, use the STAR method to answer behavioral-based questions. Situation, task, action, result. This is what the employer cares about the most, the result. So let's do an example, and then I'll basically just read out a number of behavioral-based questions that you can practice on your own. The question that I'll go over is, tell me about a new procedure you have instituted in one of your previous jobs. So again, I'll just read that out because I want you to think about this. Tell me about a new procedure you have instituted in one of your previous jobs. Very specific. So let's go over the situation. And I'm going to cater this to co-op students and mostly entry-level applicants, just because I think there's a high percentage of people that listen to this podcast that are in that category. So the situation. As a camp supervisor last summer, I was responsible for managing registration. Very simple. Task. I noticed that attendance at the camp had dropped by 30% over the past 3 years and wanted to do something to improve these numbers. So that was the task. Let's talk about the action. The action that I took was I designed a new promotional packet to go out to local community businesses. I also included a rating sheet to collect feedback on our events and organize internal roundtable discussions to collaborate as a staff. So the result. So this is basically wrapping it up. We utilized some of the wonderful ideas we received from the community, made our internal systems more efficient and visible, and raised attendance by 18% the next year. So I'll go over this one more time, and I'll have that natural flow without actually mentioning which was the situation, task, action, or result, just so you can get a sense of what it sounds like when you're talking to somebody in an actual interview. So, for example, they ask, tell me about a new procedure you have instituted in one of your previous jobs. As a camp supervisor last summer, I was responsible for managing registration. I noticed that the attendance at the camp had dropped by 30% over the past 3 years and wanted to do something to improve these numbers. I designed a new promotional packet to go out to local businesses, and I also included a rating sheet to collect feedback on our events and organize internal roundtable discussions to collaborate as a staff. We utilized some of these ideas we received from the community, made our internal systems more efficient and visible, and raised attendance by 18% the next year. This was very successful. When you wrap it up like that, that is what you're leaving the interviewer with. This is the information that you control at this point. So basically what you want to do is you want to make it positive, and you want to show the employer why you believe that you're qualified for that position. Some people say, can I use negative examples to show that I'm honest, to show that they can actually trust me because I will always admit my failures and they never have to worry that I will hide anything. I would advise against that, because if you have 15 to 45 minutes, and even let's say if 99% of the interview is spent talking about positive things, but you use the words like failure or I was not successful, those are the things that the employers, that the interviewers will think about when you leave the interview. So my advice is make it extremely positive. Tell them exactly why you believe that you can do the job. Be confident, but there's always a fine line between telling the employer why you believe you're qualified, and bragging about certain things. You do not want to brag. You do not want to be the smartest person in the room. But again, you want to be confident and you want to tell them exactly why you believe that you can do the job. I think I'm going to wrap it up there. Like I said, this was a basic overview of what a standard interview looks like, and then more specifically, behavioral-based questions. Again, last piece of advice is think about 5 or 6 different situations that you can talk about if you're asked, because the employer, even if they ask you 100 questions, they will always go back to the same categories. These categories are communication skills, teamwork, analytical. If you're in a more technical field, they might ask you about continuous improvement. They might be problem-solving skills, but they always revolve around those same categories. As always, thank you very much for listening. If you have any comments, if you have any advice, please leave a comment down below, and I will try to get back to all of you. Thank you.